In the summer of 2024, a cargo ship captain made a decision that most sailors refused to make. He pointed his vessel toward the Red Sea, straight into waters where drones were falling from the sky and missiles were skimming the surface. His crew knew the risk, his company knew the risk, and yet the ship sailed anyway, because attached to that voyage was a number that made the danger feel, at least on paper, worth it. $200,000 per day, just for showing up. This is not a story about bravery alone. It is a story about money, desperation, and the invisible economy that keeps the global supply chain alive even when the world is on fire. And it starts with a stretch of water that most people could not find on a map, but that every major economy on Earth depends on to function. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait. In Arabic, the name translates to Gate of Grief. It is a 30-kilometer wide choke point between Yemen and Djibouti, connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. About 15% of global trade passes through it. Oil, grain, electronics, clothing, medicine. The stuff of daily life, funneled through a gap in the map that you could cover with your thumb. For decades, it was routine. Ships transited, logged their passage, and moved on. Then the Houthis changed everything. Starting in late 2023, the Houthi movement in Yemen began launching coordinated attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. They framed it as solidarity with Gaza, targeting vessels they claimed had ties to Israel. But as the campaign escalated, the targeting became less precise. Ships with no Israeli connection were hit. Ships flagged to neutral countries were struck. A Greek-owned vessel, a British-managed tanker, a Japanese bulk carrier. The Houthis were not being selective. They were making a point. The Red Sea was no longer safe for anyone. The numbers tell the story. By early 2024, Red Sea shipping traffic had dropped by more than 50% compared to the same period the year before. The major shipping lines, Maersk, MSC, CMA CGM, rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope. That detour adds roughly 10 to 14 days to a voyage from Asia to Europe. It costs more in fuel, more in time, and more in everything. But for most carriers, it was the only rational choice. Except rational choices have a price. And when the alternative routes became congested and the delays started compounding across supply chains, some shippers began asking a different question. Not how do we avoid the Red Sea, but how much would it cost to go through it anyway? The answer, it turned out, was extraordinary. War risk insurance. That is the mechanism. Every commercial vessel carries a standard marine insurance policy. That policy has a base rate, a percentage of the vessel's declared value paid annually. Peaceful waters, normal trade, routine coverage. But the moment a maritime authority designates a body of water as a war risk zone, everything changes. Lloyd's of London and the Joint War Committee maintain a list of high-risk areas. When the Red Sea was added to that list, insurers began adding war risk premiums on top of standard policies. And those premiums were not modest. Reports from early 2024 put war risk surcharges at 0.5 to 1% of a vessel's value per voyage. For a large container ship or tanker worth $100 million or more, that is $500,000 to $1 million per transit. Just for the insurance. Just to cover what might happen on the way through. But insurance is only part of the cost equation. Add to that the crew bonuses. Seafarers negotiated hardship pay for transiting war zones, sometimes double their normal salary for the duration of the passage. Add the armed security teams that many ship owners began contracting, private maritime security companies sending ex-military personnel aboard to stand watch with rifles and counter-drone systems. Add the higher fuel costs from running at top speed to minimize time in the threat zone. Add the premium freight rates that shippers were now willing to pay just to get their cargo moved. When you stack all of those numbers together, the total additional cost of a Red Sea transit for a large vessel was somewhere between $1 and $3 million per voyage. Spread across the voyage duration of 2 to 4 days through the danger zone, the effective daily cost of being in that water was, depending on the vessel and the cargo, close to $200,000 per day, just for the privilege of not going around Africa. And yet, ships went through. Some always do. The ones that made the calculation work were typically tankers carrying crude oil. Oil contracts are often priced to specific delivery windows. Missing a delivery date in the energy market is not an inconvenience. It is a contract violation with financial penalties that can exceed even the war risk premium. For those operators, paying the premium was cheaper than the alternative, so they paid it. They sailed through. And for a stretch of weeks in early 2024, a peculiar equilibrium held. Some ships went around, some went through, and the ones going through were essentially running the world's most expensive toll road, except the toll collectors were firing missiles. The attacks themselves were methodical in a way that the shipping industry found deeply unsettling. The Houthis were not shooting blindly. They were using commercial vessel tracking systems, the same AIS transponder data that the entire maritime industry uses to monitor traffic. Ships broadcast their position, speed, and destination. The Houthis had people watching those broadcasts. They knew what was coming before it arrived. This created a problem with no clean solution. Turn off your AIS transponder and you become a navigation hazard to other vessels. And you also raise the suspicion of every naval vessel in the area. Leave it on and you are announcing your arrival to people who may want to sink you. Several operators experimented with modified AIS behavior, transmitting false data or delaying updates. Maritime authorities warned this created new dangers. There was no good answer. The threat environment had outpaced the rulebook. The U.S. Navy and allied forces established Operation Prosperity Guardian to escort commercial shipping and intercept Houthi drones and missiles. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group spent months in the region, her escorts shooting down drones at a pace that made accountants nervous. Each Standard Missile II used to intercept a drone costs roughly $2 million. The drones being shot down cost the Houthis a few $1,000s each. That exchange ratio, measured in dollars, was entirely in the Houthis' favor. The U.S. military was spending fortunes to defend against a threat that cost almost nothing to sustain. Everyone in the Pentagon understood the math. Nobody had a quick fix for it. Meanwhile, the economic ripple effects were spreading far beyond the Red Sea. European manufacturers that depended on just-in-time delivery from Asian suppliers began reporting production delays. Automotive plants that needed specific components started building buffer inventory for the first time in decades. Grocery chains in Northern Europe began paying more for products that had previously transited through Suez without incident. The inflation that the war risk premiums generated was not contained to the shipping industry. It leaked into everything. There is a number that puts this in context. The Suez Canal itself generates approximately $10 billion per year in transit fees for Egypt. In the first quarter of 2024, canal revenues dropped by roughly 40 to 50% as ships diverted. That is billions of dollars in lost revenue for a country that depends heavily on those fees. The Houthi campaign was not just hitting individual ships. It was shaking the financial foundation of an entire regional economy. And through all of it, the captains kept making their calculations. On one side, the risk, on the other, the reward. $200,000 a day was not a figure that appeared in any official document. It was the distilled arithmetic of insurance premiums, crew costs, security costs, and freight rates. These all stacked on top of each other and divided by the number of days a ship spent in the crosshairs. For some operators, in some market conditions, the number worked. For others, it never would. The ones who sailed through were not reckless. They were doing exactly what commercial shipping has always done, moving the math until it pointed through the danger instead of around it. The Gate of Grief earned its name long before container ships existed. For centuries, it was a passage where empires competed for control, where the spice trade met the Indian Ocean, where the world's commerce funneled through a geographic accident. In the modern era, it became invisible infrastructure, the kind of thing that nobody thought about because it always worked. When it stopped working, when the insurance premiums spiked and the missile alerts went out and the captains started doing math they never expected to do, the world was reminded of something it had almost forgotten. The global economy does not run on algorithms and supply chain software. It runs on ships, and ships are sailed by people who look at the water ahead and decide whether the number on offer is worth what the water might cost them. In most cases, they decided it was not, but some of them decided it was. And those ships, those crews, those captains running the $200,000 a day math, they kept the lights on for the rest of us. Whether anyone will ever thank them for it is another question entirely. If you want to understand how the world actually works, it is not in the boardrooms or the headlines. It is in the strait that nobody names correctly and the insurance clause that nobody reads until everything goes wrong. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.